one day I had a a client, excuse me, I had a client come walk in off the street to my front door of the business that I was in Indiana, and they were from Thailand. They said, "Hey, we're here to buy 100 vans." And I didn't realize until the first trip that I went there how powerful these people were in Thailand.
Welcome to Testimonies of Triumph, where real stories of faith come to life. In each episode, we share powerful testimonies of how God transforms trials into triumphs, bringing hope and redemption to everyday lives. Whether you're seeking encouragement, wisdom, or inspiration, you'll hear how God is working today, turning even the darkest moments into stories of victory. Now, let's dive into today's episode and witness the incredible power of God's grace in action. Well, Patrick, welcome to Testimonies of Triumph. I understand a little bit about your story, but not a whole lot. I understand that it might be rather sensational in that you've had some experiences that you probably, well, maybe people have run into you and said, you just can't make this up. And there are probably things that you've been exposed to that you just think, oh my goodness, how did this ever happen? So if you could, for just a brief minute, give us a little bit of bio sketch of who is Patrick, and then let's dive into it.
Sure. I thank you for having me again today. I really appreciate that. This is a testimony that I've shared with a few people, probably the ones that I feel close enough to that they realize I'm not blowing smoke about some of this stuff. But there was a season probably about 30 years ago. I'm old enough now to 30 years ago is not a big deal. But
I know, it feels funny, right?
yeah, there's a season that I had when I was in my 20s that I spent traveling all around the world. I can tell you my background. I went straight from high school to the workforce. And at 18, well, actually, I graduated 17 years old, but at 18 years old, I was already climbing a corporate ladder, so to speak, in the retail space. I know, and I'm not saying this boastfully, but I know how God designed me and made me as a kind of a salesman, public speaker type. I was in drama and speech in high school and spent a lot of time working the craft of my conversation. So at a pretty young age, I was able to articulate my way into a pretty lucrative job. By the time I was 19, I was hired at a major automotive firm in Indiana, and that's where the opportunities presented themselves for me to start traveling internationally. And I worked, and I know some of these things are pretty well documented. I mean, even if somebody looked me up on the internet, they would see some of this history. But I was 19 when I received my first position. By the time I was 26, I was a vice president of an international division of a corporation that was a $100 million company. So I had a very quick path to ascension within the corporate ranks and was exposed to a lot of large corporations around the world during that 19 to 26 age range. So some of the things that I experienced during that time were, as you put, sensational. But as a Christian and somebody who, when I was 14, converted away from Catholicism, but became a Pentecostal type charismatic, if you will, kind of an extreme between the two. I was pretty well grounded in my faith as far as being led by the Holy Spirit and acknowledging God as my source of anything that I was able to achieve within the business world. But having said that, 19-year-old time until I was about 24, I had spent traveling nearly 27 different countries around the world, working with different corporations. Ooh. Some of them are very well known in the name. I can tell you the big three, Ford, Chrysler, and GM, were part of those corporations. But two of them were out of Japan, which is Mitsui Bussan, which was a steel company, and then Marubeni was another top 10 at the time. I don't know where they rank today. I haven't really looked at that. But four of the top 10 companies in the world I was working with. at the middle to the upper level of management. So I received an education on the job as I went, and never went through the college course of being able to understand how to do these things. But it put me on a path to understand sales and marketing on an international basis, which basically helped me to understand different cultures, different methods of doing business, different ways of approaching consumers when you're marketing a product. And it really taught me a lot on the professional side of things. What I didn't realize is that I often became a pawn of my managers, my CEO, and different people at the upper levels of these corporations to do their bidding, if you will, to help set up schemes for uh, money laundering at the worst part, which was drug money laundering, and even some kickback monies, under the table money, things like that, that I didn't realize out of naivety that I was being involved in some of those things. So that's kind of the foundation of where my sensational story comes from.
Yeah, yeah. So I've so many questions. One of the questions is, I get that your personality, you understood it from an early age what what your faith was, and I understand. It sounds very clear to me that you had a had a clear picture of how God had crafted you, what sort of skills you had. How does one at such a young age get exposed to the first opportunity or series of opportunities that led you into this very quick path to climb the corporate ladder? What was unique about your experience that somehow or another you were either at the right place at the right time, knew the right person, or what have you?
Well, obviously, I still again give God all the credit for lining up opportunities. You know, sometimes there's doors that He opens. There's sometimes doors open that you're not supposed to take. But when I did an interview at 18 years old with a recruiter, actually, it was a headhunter, if you will,
Mhm.
that were looking to fill a sales position at this van conversion company, which is what I used to do.
Okay.
Um, they I sat with them. I got a tip to wear a power red tie, so I
Yep.
wore a red tie and I had my suit attire on.
Yep.
And some reason, this person wanted to really challenge me during their interview about my ability to do the job. Obviously, I had zero experience, so
Right.
they called me back after that interview and said that in all their years of doing the recruiting, they'd never met a young man that could speak so confidently and articulately that they said that it just left them messed up, because I told them, you're either basically going to hire me or you're going to miss out on an opportunity to get a great asset for the company that they were representing. So somehow that left a major impression on them, and they were connected with all the presidential level
Yeah.
corporate people in the community. So that is what opened the door to get there. But
Yeah.
I believe it was God knowing that I had a skill to be able to speak, and using my words to, artfully, if you will. And
Yeah.
I've obviously since then have studied many years on the use of the power of your words, and understanding scripturally what you should and shouldn't be saying, and the things that you can line up with God's word, and then making sure that you're not creating your own downfall because you've created a mess with the words that you've confessed out. So that I
Yeah.
believe that backwards, not knowing that biblically at that time, but
Yeah.
now 30, 40 years later, I'm looking at it saying, yeah, I kind of created my own path because I
Yeah.
did the things that I did.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you and I are not, I think, probably about the same age. And if I think back into the 90s, kind of what life was like in a power tie and sort of it was much more traditional business then than it is now.
Absolutely.
And things have changed a lot. And $100 million business back then was a lot of money, right?
Right.
It's a lot of money now, but it's not crazy lot of money. Back then it was a lot of money. And I find it fascinating. There must have been something much more than a sort of a traditional kid coming in and saying, "I want this job," that attracted them to you, and that's fascinating. Well, like fast forward when you figured out what they were doing as far as using you as a pawn to do all of these things. How did it get revealed to you? Did it just happen, or what
Well,
went down?
I'll give you a quick foundation of the
Yeah.
first example of what actually occurred for me to go, uh-oh, what just happened? Uh, I was doing a lot of business. I actually started in one company, worked my fingers to the bone, helping that company survive, and then had been poached by a competitor to go work for them. I was working for peanuts at the time. And I say peanuts back then, I think I was making 25, 30,000 a year was a big deal when I was 20 years old.
Yep.
But the competitor came in and said, I'll give you 36,000 plus profits or profit sharing. And for me at the time, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's great. So I went to work for them. Um, that company that I went to work for, the competitor, which all these companies that I work for are out of business. They've since folded in bankruptcy. So when I speak about them, I'm talking about the version of them that was still um, functional at that time. But I went to work for the competitor of the one that brought me in. That when I had that smart young man attitude, that company brought me in, groomed me, taught me, and all that. And then I went to work for their competitor. And I was very aggressive to try to present the brand and market of the product that I had with the competitor against my former employer. So we would go head to head in markets like in the Middle East, Europe, Asia. So when I would travel to those locations, I was presenting my brand, which was less expensive than my previous company, etc. So I was building a good rapport. I had already built a strong reputation within General Motors, which was the primary vendor that I worked with. I
Okay.
knew all of the middle management, the guys who could say yes. And I told them I went to this new vendor, and they were like, "Oh, great, we're going to expand our business." So for them, it was
Yeah.
a win-win. But I knew these people pretty well. Would go to lunch and stuff with them in Detroit. But in the Asia Pacific rim, there was still a lot of developing markets there, and one market was in Thailand. Now Thailand is all right-hand drive, and U.S. products are all left-hand drive.
Left-hand drive.
So
Yep.
one day I had a a client, excuse me, I had a client come walk in off the street to my front door of the business that I was in Indiana, and they were from Thailand. They said, "Hey, we're here to buy 100 vans," and I'm like, "Who are you?" Because you're not a regular GM dealer, which is who I sold to.
Yep.
It turns out through that conversation, I built a relationship with them. Went back and forth to Bangkok, visited with their family, and I didn't realize until the first trip that I went there how powerful these people were in Thailand. If I could say the word, the Kennedy family back then, the Kennedys in
Sure.
the United States has a very strong, recognition. They were
Yep.
the Kennedys of Thailand.
Okay.
Politics,
Wow.
big business, very involved. And when I visited there the first few times, I was shown around. I'll give you just an example. I get to the airport. Every international airport you go to, you have to go through customs and go through, all this the long lines. Well, I get off the plane, deplane, get onto the tarmac or the tunnel there, and you walk in, and I was greeted with police that would take me right from there straight to the waiting area. Bypassed all customs, all my luggage, everything was already put into a limousine. I was my visa and everything was already handled on my passport because I handed it to the police when I get there. So VIP treatment, which was
Wow.
unlike anywhere else I'd ever been in the world, where because
Sure.
you're traveling, well, this place everything was completely catered. I was there as a kind of a VIP guest of the country.
Yeah.
So I would would end up going through the tour of all of their multiple businesses. I think they had 50 some businesses, plus the father was the one of the main leaders of the government,
Yeah.
uh, member of parliament, which was the MP example, and their company was MP. That was the main thing because they named it after their father's member of parliament. Armed guard complex. Everything about them was chauffeurs, guards everywhere. The liaison I dealt with was a former um, operative for the U.S. government. So I'm like, again, I feel stupid because I'm like, what is this all about? Didn't have a clue that that's who they were when I
Right.
when I met them in the U.S. But by the time I got over there, I started seeing a lot of it. Multiple trips back and forth. I start learning about all their various businesses. In addition to the product that I sold them, they started contacting me behind the scenes saying, "Hey, can you check into this product for us and that product?" And I'm like, "Okay, cool. I could." I'm not taking away business, and my integrity level is
Sure.
like as long as I'm doing everything fine. So I start looking into alternative products that they wanted to have imported into Thailand from the U.S. And that's where I started stepping off the path of traditional Christian and being more corporate go-getter guy
Yep.
wanting to make good money. And
Yep.
that's where the story kind of all unfolded. I started a subsidiary company of my own that had nothing to do with my regular job. Started doing imports and exports with that company, and I started realizing there was ways to make money that, as long as I didn't let the left hand know what the right hand was doing between all these
Yep.
parties I was working with, I could make
Yeah.
some pretty lucrative cash, which was where I fell into the snare of being tempted by greed. And I got myself into a situation where I partnered them with a US based company that was building right hand drive Cadillacs, brand new. So they took the left steering wheel and they moved it over to the right, created a brand new dash, and it
Yeah.
would become a street product that would be competitive to BMW,
Right.
Mercedes, etc., and all these other markets. Sorry if I'm getting long-winded, but
That's right.
the um, the the situation ended up being that the company that was converting to right-hand drive for these Cadillacs was owned by a U.S. congressman at the time in
Oh,
Michigan.
really?
And this U.S. congressman had ties to GM.
Okay.
And I was in GM at one point doing business for my regular company, wearing
Yeah.
my regular hat for my regular job. And there was a man in the room that represented the Asia Pacific operation for General Motors. And then I ended up going to another meeting with this right hand drive Cadillac. And the same guy from my van business was in the same room and looked at me like, "Why are you here for this when you work for so and so?" And it started to crumble.
Yeah.
I'm doing
It's getting
business.
complicated.
It's getting so. It turns out that I bought 3 prototype Cadillacs from a GM dealer in Michigan. They wired me money. It was like 150 grand or something like that they sent over. I got the money, paid the Cadillac dealer. But when I bought the cars from the Cadillac dealer, I said, "Hey, how about a rebate on some of these cars? Since I'm buying these, let's do
Sure.
this manufacturer's rebate." So I was catching a little bit of back end money from the dealer. I
Yep.
went to the manufacturer that was owned by the congressman, and I talked to their managing director. Said, "How about a little, money
Yeah.
behind the scenes? If I keep bringing these to you, will you give me?" Because I thought, okay, I can expand this to any country around the world because I have all these contacts. Well, it turns out the company that was selling these Cadillacs ended up filing for bankruptcy before the Cadillacs were completed. And the people in Thailand said, "Where's my cars?" And I was their liaison. I said, "I don't know. They're stuck in that building." Well, assets are frozen. The company in Thailand started not being very happy about what was happening, pulled me into a meeting with them, with the company in Michigan. I go up there. I'm being very fast track on this story. I
That's
sit
fine.
in a room. There's the congressman is at the head of the table. Bottom line is they're buying the assets of the bankrupt company to guarantee they can get their Cadillac deal done. The seller of the assets cooked the books. There was really no value to anything. They claimed a lot of these Cadillacs were functionally could be sold, but they were actually do not sell demos from General Motors that were given them for prototype purposes only. They could never be
Yeah.
street legal. so they didn't have functional VINs on them. But bottom line is, the Thailand company sued the congressman, and the congressman sued me because I messed up a deal for them. I got involved in a $10 million lawsuit at the time. In the midst of the lawsuit, and this is where it got crazy, I get a call from the U.S. State Department to try to find out who
people want to call from, by the way.
They said, hey, Patrick, we know who you are. We know that you are dealing with so-and-so, the congressman, this congressman trying to leverage his lawsuit is using all his powers in Washington to get what he wants. So this call from the State Department says, we want you to understand the people you've been doing business with in Thailand are under close scrutiny from the DEA because they became billionaires within a 4-year time. And it just so happened that this family I was dealing with had a shipping company that did river cruise boats going into southern China. And they were smuggling whatever was being manufactured in China back and forth between Thailand on these boats. And that was a way for them to get mad rich. And because the father was a member of parliament, was able to use his influence to get a lot of things done. Well, it just so happens that the father of this family also was the godfather of Thai kickboxing. So when you think Don King for boxing, the father there was Don King of kickboxing. Through this lawsuit, everything's going on. They call me saying, what's happening in the States? We just found out that the father rejected his visa to go to Vegas for the world championships for kickboxing. And it turns out that this congressman, through his State Department connections, said whatever he had to say to get the father banned from coming to the U.S. with a visa, went through all the newspapers in Thailand that he couldn't come to the U.S. because of DEA suspicions. And then they were mad at me because I blew up this whole thing on their side. Turns out that the products they were buying from me were a storefront to launder the funds that they had coming in through other issues.
Yeah.
I ended up getting out of that lawsuit by the power of God, because I was never so scared in my life, because the next time I had traveled over to Thailand, no more VIP connection at the gate.
For sure.
When I got there, I had to go through the long lines. They told me to take a taxi to my hotel. I got to my hotel. We did about an hour meeting with them, cold as ice. And they said, we have a driver that's going to take you back to the airport. They never, ever did that before. I don't know this guy from Adam, and I know the route from my airport to my hotel like the back of my hand because I've been there so many times. They said, get in the car with him and he'll take you there. Good luck.
Get out. Get out. Wow.
I was driving in the back of this car, and I don't know if y'all do it, but I was praying in tongues. I was freaking out. It was so scary for me, because he took me on a route in the country that had nothing to do with the route straight to the airport, because it was all straight highways right from where I was at. It took me 2 hours to get there, and I think it was just a warning sign that, hey, we could do whatever we want with you and you'd never be found. And so I ended up getting to the airport, and that was the last time I ever went to Thailand. This was probably in '94 that I was over there. And I know that's the first story, and I had written all this all out and was going to try to release a book about it called The Psychological Vampire. Was the name I was going to call it, because their people said that the way I would deal with them. Yeah. And this is the contrast of the giftings of God, is that they said I would say and do things in such a way that it would play mind tricks on them, because I could articulate and so cunningly speak in a certain way. And that scared me too, because I'm like, what are you talking about? They said, you try to pick people's brains and just go through it to figure out what angle you want to do to be able to get what you want, which obviously 30 years later, I'm saying, okay, maybe I was narcissistic. Maybe I was dealing with a lot of things in a negative way. But I also recognize, I'm like, but that's partly how God gave me the path that I was on. I'm able to discern and see and understand and be able to sell and do the things that I'm doing. So anyway, that chapter came to a close. I realized what happened. I didn't mention the one time I'd gone over there. I'd taken my wife with me. We sat around a table for dinner because they had a family compound where they all sat and ate dinner, and they were discussing one of their competitors and what they're going to do to deal with this competitor. And the wife of the people I was dealing with said, "Well, just have him killed. What's the problem? Just get him out. He's like a fly." And I sat there and I just kind of looked around. I'm like, I thought they were joking, and they were being
Yeah.
serious. It was like no big deal that was how they were going to deal with it. And I think from that point on, I kind of did an ostrich thing. I'm like, this didn't really just happen. So I knew from which pool this thing was going from, and it became probably the foundation of realizing I can't just be so innocent when I go into business with some of this stuff. And maybe a year later, dealing with some people in the Middle East, same scenario that I didn't realize I got contacted by these people, said, "Hey, we want to buy a bunch of Suburbans," and got through this whole thing. And by this time I was so tied in with GM. I'm like, I'm not doing anything directly with people. I'm going to go with GM only and deal with them. But it turns out, um, long story short, I ended up being a whistleblower to GM on 4 of the 5 executives that were in charge of the whole Middle East operations. They were all on the take from this deal that I was working on, and they all ended up. GM ended up basically forced them to resign their posts and replace them and put them in other parts of the world. And I was promised protection from GM that if I would tell them who it was and what they were doing and show them proof, then they would, be good with everything, and I wouldn't get in any kind of trouble, because I started seeing and smelling a lot of they said, put your invoice, the shipment invoices on these has to read this amount so that when it goes in the country. I'm like, yeah, but that's like 10,000 higher than what I'm actually sending. And, I'm naive, not realizing they're wanting me to basically cook the books to make it valued higher so they can get a bigger kickback through the import tax and all those fees. So they had this formula of being able to do this and still be able to sell it at the retail level, and everybody got happy over there, got paid off, which, as I understood from several friends that I had made at the time over in the Middle East, that was a very common practice for a lot of import and export type deals, where the people in the middle management end up making extra money and their bosses don't care because they know that they're getting what they want because money was so big. So anyway, the company I was dealing with there, I had people all over the world that I was working with. I had a company in Germany that knew about the company in the Middle East, and they had told me, he said, "Patrick, you need to stay away from those people." He said, "I have a friend that went to work with them and ended up getting his legs broken because of, he did this and told it, they said do it, and he said no, and they found him in a hotel and all this." I'm like, okay. So it is sensational, but I promise you it was absolutely 100% my experiences. And by the time I'd gone through that so many times, my company that I worked for at the time in 1996, 97 was going bankrupt. And my CEO was here. I was a VP.
Yeah.
At that time, the company was going bankrupt. I got calls from people that I had never even met before that said, "Hi, I used to deal with your boss, the CEO. Knowing you're going forward with the new company that's buying you out, we want to give you the same deal that we gave him," which was all paper bag money under the table, "if you'll just do X, Y, and Z." So I started realizing, I'm like, what is going on? Like, everywhere I turn, there's paper bag money, there's kickbacks.
Yeah.
I was just like, I'm crazy not understanding what's going on. And I'll be honest, the offers that they were making me, I could have been a
Sure.
multimillionaire easily. And
Yeah.
that's where when I shared with you my testimony that I sent in, is in Psalm 15, God talks about what he expects a person to be that will be in his presence. And in verse 4, it says, even if you make a promise or an oath, you should keep it, even if it's to your own hurt. And I think that impacted me in such a way that says, yeah, I've got easy money, but I made a commitment to God that I would live according to his plan and his standard. And even though I could have lucrative money flowing my way and maybe have a better case in life with my family, I'm not going to do that because that is not God's standard. And I walked away from hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in kickbacks and incentives and stuff if I would just turn my head and do things in the wrong way, if that makes sense.
Oh
It
yeah.
it does. Go ahead, Jordan.
After you have learned that you cannot serve two masters, and that lesson was acquired, it's a pretty easy answer on would you rather have those millions and the constant thoughts of always trying to accumulate more, always trying to cover up your ends to not get overwhelmed and caught back up. The value of the pricelessness of feeling the presence of God and knowing that you're in alignment, those things are way more valuable and beneficial in the long run, to have a peace of mind, to be able to lay your head at night and be able to rest and not have to have that always stressful, always more, was it the right thing, just a constant conflict within the mind. It's got to be kind of reassuring after learning that, because it's not easy to learn, but once we learn, it's pretty amazing.
It's a tough lesson to learn, but I'm 56 years old right now. I want to tell you that the lessons still haven't stopped. I've owned my own company since 1999, which I ended up starting my own business. Said I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not working in the corporate world. I'm going to have my own set of standards, my own integrity. But even in owning my own business, I've been presented with so many unbelievable black, dark situations that, the money grab is easy if you want to do that, but to try to live with integrity and again, even to his own hurt is what that chapter said. There's a lot more involved in there. It says even a person who doesn't take bribes. That whole chapter 15 is just brilliant to anyone who wants to do business and do it God's way. You better be ready to understand that those are standards that he expects. And it's not about, well, unless you're like, you have a medical need, then you go ahead and do this. There is no exception. It's black and white. And it's very clear that integrity in business is basically keeping an oath to God himself to make sure that you do as unto the Lord. Just what the scripture tells us is to make sure that when we are serving, that we are serving as unto the Lord. And I know it's a flippant statement that a lot of people use in Christianity, is like, well, I'm cleaning these toilets as unto the Lord. Yeah, you are. In fact, I've gotten to a situation where in business, I can't make ends meet at times, and I have to do stuff. And more recently, I was actually cleaning toilets. And I was like, as unto the Lord, as unto the Lord. So it's when you walk through valleys of learning, those lessons don't just say, it's not just in the rear window. There are things that you have to keep looking forward, going, I'm still under the same standards. Maybe I'm in a different setting, different time of life, different whatever, but God doesn't change his expectations on us, and nor do we have some kind of exceptions because we've learned, or we've got some kind of like wisdom jewels that, the gray hair that we have on our head is supposed to entitle us to not have to be going through tests anymore. It doesn't change. You still have the same things presented, and the enemy doesn't change his approaches. He's still trying to get you to fall, even if you've accomplished, hey, I know I'm not going to go do this now. Well, by changing this and rearranging that and making it, now look about this one. And it's been that thing. It's where I've had to realize, I see what's happening here. I can't get involved in this because I know it's going to end up in the same place that I was before. I'm sorry, I can't do that type of thing.
The discernment.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me, because I personally know a lot of people who are struggling with the integrity component of work, right? Where you go to church on the weekend, you hear about all these relationships, and you hear a sermon, and that's fantastic. And then Monday morning, you go into the office, you go to the warehouse, you do whatever you're going to do, and opportunity meets need, and temptation is in the middle of it all. And there are all of these. It's almost as if that black and white line becomes very gray and very wide. And as you walk from the light to the dark, you kind of don't know. As you're doing it, you know you shouldn't be doing it, but it's almost as if you walk across the line and you don't even realize it, right? You sort of it sort of chips away. I know that there are going to be people who are watching this or listening to this who are struggling with exactly that. This integrity challenge on a day-to-day basis. If you had, I don't know, group of people who had all raised their hands and said, yeah, that's me. I have no idea what I'm doing here, how to get out of it, or what I should do next. What are the top maybe 2 or 3 things that come to mind for you that either you experienced and they helped you get through that, or that you can look back on and say, man, I sure wish I had, or, whatever it might be, just as far as advice?
I think the one thing that's grounded me more than anything else is realizing that God is our El Shaddai. He's our provider. He's our Jehovah Jireh. He's the one that provides everything we have, and that nothing we attain in our career is by our own hand. You are given gifts and talents by God to be fruitful. The Bible says to be fruitful and multiply, not only with people, but when he took Adam and he put him in the garden and says, take care of all this, he expected him to keep it fruitful and to keep it multiplying and growing. I think we have to recognize that whatever title we've been given, whatever position we've climbed the ladder for, and we've fought and kicked and scratched to get to that place, none of that has anything to do with you and your hand. It's all because God put you in that position. I've often looked at myself, and there's too many stories to not look at it this way, but I feel like I'm a Joseph in my career, is that God doesn't put me at the top position. He puts me next to power. He puts me next to influence and all these different people. And until I accepted that my goal is not to be the king of the world and, the next Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. I'm the guy just below that level that pulls levers and moves things. And my goal is that somewhere in the midst of all that, I'm leaving a legacy of integrity and of truth. And I think if you can accept your job is that you are doing kingdom work, it's not providing for your family, it's not getting a new house. You're doing kingdom work because God created you to be an advocate for the kingdom. And it just so happens you have a job. And part of the latter part of my career here in the last several years, I was involved in the Christian entertainment industry with music and film. And there's a lot of terms where people say, "Are you a Christian singer, or are you a Christian artist?" Well, what is a Christian artist? It's actually an artist who is a Christian, but not a Christian artist. I'm a marketing agency owner who's a Christian. I'm not a Christian marketing agency owner. So
that's right. Yeah.
Rearranging your thinking that everything you do, everything you touch is as a ambassador for Christ. And I think if you keep that in mind, that you're not doing things on your own power, number one, and number two is that you're always doing kingdom work, and you should always be focusing, how is this impacting the kingdom? How is what I'm doing? And oh yeah, by the way, God's the one who's going to pay my bills. I'm not doing that. I'm not the one going out there digging for gold. God provides. And there's been, I don't know, hundreds of opportunities over the last 30 years where God has somehow sent money through the mail that I didn't know was coming. I had no idea where it was from.
Yeah.
I had a domain one time where I owned it. I named my company Hessport, which was my last name plus port, import, export.
Yeah.
I had the domain hessport.com for years, and I stopped using it. And I got an email from somebody who says, "I want to buy your domain." And at that time, I was behind on my mortgage by 3 payments. And they said, "I want to be able to buy your name." And I'm like, Hessport? Who needs the name Hessport? What is that about? If you go look it up today and type in hessport.com, it's a soccer team in the Middle East that is called Sport or something like that. And they use the AP. And they bought it, and they said, "I'll give you $700 for it." I said, "How about $1,500?" And they said, "Done." They wired me the money, and I got caught up on my mortgage in the next 2 days. It's
That's awesome.
It's where God knows his role in your job. His role is to provide. He's the owner of a cattle of 1,000 hills, or on 1,000 hills, and he is the provider. He's Jehovah Jireh. He's the breasty one, the one that gives you what you need to be successful in your job. Your job is stewardship, and that's the third part, is that you first acknowledge that it's him that does it. He's the provider. Second, you're always looking for kingdom opportunities in what you do. And third is that you are a steward over all of this. If he gives you the ability to speak, you better be doing things that where God can be glorified through the way that you speak, which is why I'm a pastor. I'm still a teacher, and I do work in. Funny enough, I started a ministry online, and now I'm doing teaching pastors in Uganda via this kind of method. I do teaching on Saturdays, and I speak in those words that I used to be able to use to conjure up business the way I thought it. Those same words are being used to advance the kingdom. So you have to be a steward over those things that God's given you. I don't care what your standard is, what you think you are. You're a member of the kingdom first. And all those other things, the Bible says, if you seek him first, all these things will be added unto you. And that's where in integrity, you got to remember, I'm nothing. I'm a pawn, if you will. And you do humility, just like Christ had to humble himself. When he had the ability to overcome and do things, he still humbled himself. If we have that Christ-like attitude that, yeah, I may be president, or I may own my own business, or I may have, I may drive a Mercedes, but stop thinking about that as your definition of who you are. Your definition is, I'm a servant of Christ, and that I have to function on that level to be able to make sense of why I'm even doing what I do.
And you are a blessing, and I'm encouraged by the story that you have lived, because you have been through some experiences that not only are let's be frank, they're fun to listen to. The other, though, is that there are real life lessons in there that you have come through, and now you get a chance to be able to impart those on others. And I think that I dig the fact that you're being obedient in that, and it's fun to watch. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on Testimonies of Triumph. We hope today's story inspired and encouraged you to see God's hand at work in your life. A special thank you to our amazing engineers and production team at Waldrop Communications for making this show possible. Until next time, keep walking in faith, and remember, God's grace is with you every step of the way.